3.3 major project 4, staying focused. For project 4, I've been researching armour and various types of armour, but I focus particularly on chain mail. I see creativity is my armour, so this was a particularly interesting piece of research for me to do. And what I wanted to do is, I don't want my work just to be seen as knitting with mixed media, that the knitted fabrics are just decorated with various types of media that either connect with colour or they generate a piece of tactility. So I'd gone back to some feedback from my 3.2 assessment, and what I wanted to demonstrate in project 4 was I can stay focused with the use of creative yarn. So fortunately the colour palette remains either silver, grey, or yarns that resonate knitting with wire to demonstrate chainmail links. So I went through my stores, and these samples that I wanted to demonstrate to you are just the various types of yarn that I've used, and also to demonstrate my knowledge. Also, there was a particular piece of feedback from a presentation that I did from level 2, and I wasn't too sure as to whether to take it as a positive piece of feedback or as a negative, because somebody asked me the question, do you not think that you should upgrade the single bed knitting machine to something else? My answer to that was, I think a creative artist can work with the materials that he is given. And yes, I agree there are limitations, but sometimes I think we can rely possibly too much on technology that has the all dancing, all singing buttons and levers and so forth. So I took that on board, and for project 4 I wanted to demonstrate through knitting, through research, how creative my single bed knitting machine can be. There are elements of handwork also as well, a little bit of hand knitting, and also use of mixed media. So I just want to go through the samples. I started off with a knitted piece that was chunky yarn. I like the stitches on this particularly because it starts to resemble the texture of chainmail, and that was partially to do with the research, sustaining the tactility that chainmail gives. Obviously the knitwear gives something that's slightly lighter, slightly more flexible and adaptable when used on the body. Now, interestingly, I was able to find an array of yarn, but I think if I go large scale with the use of some of these yarns, it's the cost effectiveness that doesn't always work. It's not sustainable for what I'm trying to achieve. But with things like pom-pom yarns and using the tension and various tensions on the single bed knitting machine, it still generates something that resembles my research of the chain mail. Here we can see I've knitted holes with a linen yarn, and I've attached silver rings to resemble the rings of the chainmail. Again, it's soft, it's textured, and it's flexible. Through here I've gone more in depth with my techniques, which has been ongoing learning from 3.2, where I did a collaboration with a machine knitter, and also making a continuation with mixed media. I've used rope to generate the texture of chainmail. A percentage of these have turned out quite flexible and quite adaptable, so I think I could see some of the samples, if not all of them, being used for a commercial market by where garments could be worn. Even some of the coarser types yarn or the thicker yarns still work. One of the things that I did notice is a lot of the creative yarns are potentially harder to work with. Their tension, if it's a delicate piece, doesn't always feed through the needles. Sometimes it snaps or sometimes it gets jammed in the machine. This has become a learning curve because obviously this also helps with the design process as to whether the materials are going to work. But I think even just by using the same technique but changing the quality of the yarn, we can see the variety of the chainmail that is generated through these samples. Again, I always seem to like the reverse, still using techniques of making holes within the honeycomb tuck. Again, quite a very commercial design, but also quite bold and chainmail like. I really would have liked to have made some of these big scale. The only thing that I would probably say with the colour palette, it does start to look something completely different. I think it starts to move away with the connections of the creative playground. I almost feel that these pieces are a little bit more refined, which again, through the research of the ateliers, that is their aim through their design processes and their making, that they are looking for refinement and perfection. So at all times I cast on properly and I cast off, and I make sure that I have sufficient amount of stitches in the width and the length and so forth. And then just playing around with different shapes and ideas. Some of the yarns are particularly more creative. I like the fact that some of the yarns are automatically kind of more stretchy if they've got a little bit of elastic in them. So again, this can move and distort around the body. And then another simple idea that I came up with, that if I couldn't physically afford metallic yarns, then spray paint some knitted samples to generate the metallic finish to the arm to make connections with the research of armour. One particular piece that I did finish, and this was used with metal scourers and a very delicate linen creative yarn, two types knitted together in the knitting machine, and this was a particularly successful piece. Again, I would love to have made this large scale. I think there's possibilities, but I think this is now kind of removed into another zone for me. But I really feel that this piece reflects the research that I've done with armour. The ateliers, looking at Jean-Paul Gaultier, John Galliano and Alexander McQueen, and I think this piece is kind of a conclusion to that research. I'm still loving the movement and the flexibility of the product, and I think I possibly will develop this and just make one big piece of fabric, because I think it feels quite unique. It's wearable. The colour palette on its own speaks, and I think it just speaks creativity is my armour.